Thank you for having me. Thanks for taking a little time out of your busy schedule in order to just listen to a few thoughts about what it means in order to center data equity. So, what I'm going to go through a little bit is kind of setting up why we need data equity. I think we all know, but I definitely want to make sure that we're kind of on the same page on that. And then move into what is data equity, how I define it, and then I think what we need to do as far as the future. So, how to get to that justice level. And of course, if you don't already follow me on the Twitter, please do. People tell me that what I say is kind of funny and also sometimes a bit too real, and invokes certain emotions of happiness and joy. And yeah, say that, sis. So feel free to do that. All right. So let me begin by saying when it comes to data, data is this like four-letter word that we hear a lot about a lot, but people are very scared of it. They're scared of what data comes to them. They're scared of what data they actually release out into the world. And because we're in these digital systems, we don't necessarily know how data is moving through these systems. And so I like to, at the very top of a lot of conversations and remarks, to just say what data is to me. And data really is just guiding all of us in making decisions that are actually affecting other people. And the reason why I bookend this conversation with data is because people are always part of this continuum. And we don't necessarily consider data as part of us or in us, but it is. And this is kind of the beginnings of what this equity conversation is gonna we're gonna go through. So when it comes to data, not in the digital realm, in the digital space, we're looking at automation, and we're looking at automations in several different access points. That happens to be in the algorithms that we use or create, the systems that we use or create, the platforms that we use. We really don't create those, let's be real. The practices of how data is going through these systems and these platforms, which again, we don't really create. And then policies. And this is really about kind of the law and regulation, which again, we really don't engage in at all, or are really part of the conversation. But data is including all of these things. It is text, it is video, it is imagery, it is all of it, right? And people don't think about how data encompasses all of our identity and humanity, not just this quantitative version of it. So I use the Twitter a lot. And so I wanted to start this real conversation about how tech and data does things right and does things wrong. So I'm going to start with how tech is very just. So just the other day, I wind up seeing a photo. And in the photo, as you can see, I asked a question like, who is she? Because everybody know who I want to know whose name it is. And who she um, is the lone Black woman in the sea of Black women. So immediately, I got people like liking it, retweeting it, the things that happen on these platforms. But the beautiful part about it was that I was able to figure out who the person was because I had no idea of how to sleuth to find out, right? I just knew NASA, 1953, group thing. I don't know what this group was about. I went to the person who posted it website to see if maybe there was an article or some context of what the program was that this person was a part of. And lo and behold, someone else sleuthed and found who the person was. And it's Janice Lawson. Fascinating person, very small Wikipedia page. You can feel free to look at her small Wikipedia page as well. But this is when data is done right. There is an accounting, there is a record that actually can lead you to the truth and the correct information. But on the corollary, we have data done wrong. And data done wrong, there's many examples. So I just chose a recent example that I've seen on different platforms. And this one happens to be concerning the Lambda School. If you're unfamiliar with the Lambda School, it is one of several schools that purport to educate and then place individuals into tech positions and taking them from zero to tech, essentially, in a matter of a year or 18 months. And a lot of what the Lambda School and other such programs concentrate on is really trying to make sure that there's no upfront cost to the learner. But that does mean that on the back end, the learner is therefore has to sign an agreement in order to pay back if they receive a job that's above a certain amount, like $50,000 or $60,000. They will pay back a portion of their paycheck directly back to the organization. And there's a lot of news, a lot of detailed work around, a lot of reporting about how the numbers are fudged, and of course, how people aren't necessarily placed in tech roles and tech positions, the difficulty for the learners, as well as this burden of debt that is hanging over them. And so I wanted to highlight just one place where tech done wrong in the realm of education, since I am an educator. I like to teach, and I think I do it okay, right? And so in this way that data has been done wrong, we can see that when a third party, an independent entity, is sifting through the numbers, if you think of data as just numbers, and then sifting through the experiences where data is an oral history, they then find how these schools are predatory in their practices and how they advertise differently than what is happening truly on the inside. And so if you want to see the full article, I have the link here. Happy to put that link into the chat once these comments are over. But just so you see, this differential is very stark. This is using data in a good way to show you 74% placement is what is shared publicly, but the internal numbers are showing only 27% are actually being placed in a role, a tech-oriented role, 180 days later, post-graduation. And then only 16%, 90 days after graduation. So the company has shared data that is not backed up by what's happening internally. Tech just done really wrong. Now, this is in a corporate space, right? But what I want to bring us down to is what happens inside the creation and the design of systems. And so there's another data done wrong that I needed to share. And this again happened in the past few days. I wind up seeing this particular tweet that happens to be on my left from this person named Carl. I don't know who Carl is, but Carl wind up saying some truths about, racist AI and this translation of French to English, and commenting on it. Wonderful exchange between two scholars that are recognizing the racism that exists within an embedded and codified in code. And then we have Pierre. Then Pierre comes in order to chime his 2 cents to talk about Black people and a racial slur and justifying and debating its existence within the translation. And then it has some seconds in there, and one of the seconds to this idea of Pierre's happens to be Neil. Now, I don't know these 3 individuals, don't know exactly what the translation code is, but what we have here, though, is conversations that typically aren't shared publicly, now being shared publicly. These are real conversations that people creating tech, creating code are having with each other. Now, no one in here is actually of the community in which this is being spoken about. So all of the assumptions are being made based upon the codifying of language and are stereotypes with no one to counterbalance. So to me, this is a place where data is done wrong. The people creating the actual systems are not the people who are actually going to be impacted by the systems. So I have some statement slides. The statement is rigid automated structures are not made for this people first and value centered type of impact. We are not in a place where we can trust automation as it stands because the automation has been developed and reused and repurposed and recycled and augmented and added to by individuals who are not representative of all communities. And that is global communities, that is racial, gender, class, veteran, ableist, all of the communities, not representative. So they're rigid. I surmise that it's actually just racist. Right. Maybe there's no intent to be racist, but it is racist. So that brings me to data equity. And when it comes to how to move the automation tooling from being discriminatory to being less discriminatory, I want to provide definition or framing around how we talk about data equity and what it really means and what that impact needs to be. And so I start with the impact. And the impact is that data is to be inclusive. And that's to all people's backgrounds and conditions. So there is a human factors element to this, which I'll get to. But more importantly, to be data inclusive means that we have to think about data as more than numbers. We have to think about data as more than just a soundbite. We have to consider the full arc of how data moves in our systems and how we ingest data. We might call it data, we might call it information, we might call it knowledge, we might call it wisdom, we might call it insights, we might call it impact, but all of these are synonymous with data because it's all about how we interpret, how we vet content in order to know how we are then going to operationalize that. How are we going to make decisions based upon what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've experienced? And those things are 360 view, not just quantitative and mathematical and computational, but it includes the social, the political, the historical, the economical, the civic realms, all right? So we want data as we know them inside of digital systems to do their best in order to guard against discrimination. And that does mean that we are going to need to do some different interventions and some different tooling. So in general, we have to look at data equity as a way to restore trust. And the trust is in 3 different areas. I like 3s, by the way. So you're going to see another 3s coming up. But so we want to restore trust in data itself. So where data is like coming from, understanding the limitations of data as we ingest it inside of digital systems, the data processes and practices that we use on the data, and then of course the output. So what is the data products that are happening, right? So when it comes to those data products, we are looking at the impact of the technology by way of the data, right? So I want to pause here for a second because data products might be something you might not have thought about before. So another way to think about data products is tech products. Another way to think about tech products is software. Another way to think about software is open source. So our whole society is looking at data products and whether or not we think of it as a tech product, or think of it as a software, or we think of it as a software library, or we think of it as in the open source movement that is happening within the tech realm. All of it is based upon the fundamentals of data use, and I'm going to say the data misuse. All right. So this all means that we are in the data, because people are the data, data are the people. So that means we need to now shift the power dynamics. And of course, the question is, how do we do that? How do we shift the power dynamics? Because it has been institutionalized and standardized and normalized, systematized in a way that is impossible just to burn it all down. I will say it's impossible to burn it all down. There are others that believe we should just burn it on down, start over. I don't know if that's really going to be something that happens. Love to have that discussion at the end of this. But I do think that there are ways in order to shift the power dynamics. That means that there is going to need to be buy-in from people who are outside of marginalized communities. So for white people, people who have privilege or are of privilege, need to be active in shifting the power and shifting the privilege. So when it comes to data equity and breaking it down a little further of how to make things inclusive, as I said, I like threes. So I consider there's 3 factors that we need to consider. I'm going to concentrate on the first 2, but I will be going through kind of all 3 in a way as I continue this conversation. So the first one happens to be human. The first factor is going to be the human factor. So what people do you trust? And how are the people that you trust understanding the social context? So many of us sit in rooms where we're the only one of whatever the only one is, only Black. I mean, I'm triple of only one. I'm the only Black person, only woman, only sometimes US citizen. I'm the only, right? The only one that has like this intersection. So if I say something, when someone says something back to me, what do I think about in that trust that I have in what they're saying? All right, so that's the human factor. The second one is algorithmic factors. And this is the trust in the digital systems themselves and trying to think about what is the timeliness of the data, right? Because data has a shelf life. There are times in which data can't be useful. It's not relevant anymore. It's the way in which terminology changes over time. You know, there was a time in which we said trifling, if someone's trifling, right? Some people don't even know what I'm talking about. But now we say how people are dope, right? And there was a time in which saying someone was dope meant the same thing as means saying someone is dope today, right? But that happened to be like in the 80s. So we need to think about how data has a time shelf limit, and when certain data is useful, when certain data isn't. And algorithmically, what data is coming into that system and if that data is really timely or relevant or useful for the purpose that we want. And then there's just really the question about, do we even trust the digital system that data is being ingested into, right? These are the conversations that are really being had around content moderation. The last one, which is way outside my realm of expertise, but I thought it was important to mention, is compliance. And this is about the trust in policy enforcement, and of course, regulation. So this is in the legal realm of things. How do we ensure that we have equity in how policy is being delivered, right? And the frameworks in order to make sure that that policy is centering the most vulnerable and done in timely ways, okay? So what that means is that what I am suggesting and proposing is that we have really a whole new line of possibilities in how we look at data equity. And that's really the data equity professional. And a data equity professional is someone who is going to be sitting in the room during the ideation, the design, the implementation process, and really be the one in order to now critique if equity is actually happening inside the system. And if it's not, where isn't documenting it? And so I have a couple of slides, and I'm almost done with my remarks, but I have just a couple of thoughts of what a data equity professional needs to do, like have a top front of mind. And I think the very first thing really is spotting when tech is done right, when data is done right, when data is done wrong, and then everything in between, because nothing is black and white. There's a whole spectrum of gray that we have to consider. This is conversations about misinformation, disinformation right now. But there's other conversations around how to understand when the data is not providing the insight that it should, and it's influencing in harmful ways. Then secondly, there is really a way in order to explain and interpret everything that's happening within the data industry. And it's really to ensure that there is what I call the pair principles. It's really being pair principled, and that's looking at participation, access, inclusion, and representation. I think it's really part of that power shift dynamic, is that we have to have all four of these prongs in order to really shift the conversation and shift the dynamics of power. In order to get to equity, we need to have all of these things: participation, access, inclusion, and representation. We can't have one of them. We can't have just two of them or three of them. We need to have all of them at the same time for more than one person, right? So we need to move in a stampede way versus an individual marathon way. So other thoughts that I have about this data equity professional is really understanding some of the issues around the legal and the social and societal, really, in how we develop equity data privacy practices, our personal data privacy, as well as our family and our community privacy. How do we do that? What does that mean? What are the limitations? Where are the gaps in the law? Where are the gaps in our understanding as the public? What is the gaps in understanding as people within the data industry, right? Because we don't necessarily think about legal and social issues if you have a tech degree or a data degree. It's not part of your curriculum. Next up is really identifying and creating interventions. And these interventions have this approach in order to actually shift the power. Like, how can we create levers that if something is we know something is going to cause harm to a certain community, that we do a counterbalance? And then how do we create other types of structures within the law and outside the law in order to ensure that those levers aren't superseded by other algorithms or other approaches? So trying to essentially avoid a voter suppression like initiative that's currently happening in the United States, but doing that that type of protection of equity inside of data spaces proactively versus reactively. And then lastly, really trying to understand for a data equity professional, how do we deal with data quality? And this is a big ticket item. How do we now apply these interventions in order to ensure data quality? How do we define data quality for ourselves and, of course, the organizations in which we operate? And that means that we have to determine what strategies of equity are actually working and for which communities. So there are some equity frameworks, I think, out of the UK and out of Australia. I think there are a couple that are kind of roaming around other parts of Europe. But let's look at those as, first landscape, and then figure out what works best for your organization, your team, that you're involved in? And then how do all of that equity work fold in with processes, analyses, and reports that happen? So there is that communication part, that explanation component that needs to be equitably shared, as well as delivered in a way that is clear, compelling, but also not manipulative, right? So that's kind of my thoughts about what I think the data equity professional needs to look like. And where I think when we look for justice, our justice needs to come in a space where we're not in the courtroom, but we are in that software development room. We are in the spaces of educating others about the data industry. So we need to push back, and that we, meaning everyone that's listening to this, anyone that's in the tech space, as particularly if you're in the data industry, we need to push against this notion that tech is going to solve all of our problems. And it is the best way. Tech solutions are the best way to do stuff. But what we need to do is now take tech, parts of the technology, and use it in order to help with some reform, help with some shifting of thought paths, shifting of practices, in moving our society to a better, more inclusive space for all humanity. So I will conclude by saying, I think we all need to be rebel techies. So I call myself a rebel techie. I made it up, but that's what I call myself. And I think that's what we need. We need people in technology who have all the degrees, or have all the experience, or engage with folks who are building technologies, are explaining technologies, who are educating people in technologies, in order to really be critical thinkers about it, and then operationalize that. Figure out how to now do this in practice, and grow the rebel techies. So with that, thank you. As I said, follow me on the Bird app. I have a newsletter, and then of course I am writing a book called Data Conscience: Algorithmic Siege on Our Humanity. It'll be out in 2022, mid 2022. So hopefully it will be another step in figuring out how do we talk about and explain data equity, and really make sure that we can put it into practice. Thank you for your time and your attention, and I'm open for conversation and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. I see Auntie Kim has a hand raised.
Hi, Dr. Marshall.
Hello.
And you know what? Now that I think about it, I listened to your presentation. You were probably the first person I should have called, because I knew you at this point when I was in this situation that I'm going to describe. So you talked about being, I forget the phrase you used, a data accountability person. What was that phrase you used?
Well, oh my God.
A responsible data person. So
yeah. I said there's many terms.
Right, a lot of different terms.
Yep.
Okay, so here's a scenario, and I've talked about this a couple different times, and again, I realized that I probably should have reached out to you when I was in it, and I might have. Anyway, so here's a scenario. So you talk about being a responsible data professional. I'm given a data set. Now, this is a real story. I'm given a data set, and what the organization wants is to see where their needs are in terms of making sure their patient population is receiving advanced genomics screening for cancer. So this is a major cancer center at a major northern city where they make cars, and a very strong Black population.
Right.
So my supervisor gives me the data and says, just give me back, what you find. And what I found was, so you do the normal types of stratifying your data. Looked at gender. I looked at specifically I looked at gender, and I looked at race. Now this is a medical institution which probably greater than 80% of their patient population is Black, but fewer than 10% of them got the advanced genomic screening.
Correct. Yep.
When I presented that data, I think that was the beginning of the end of my tenure at this particular company. I'm just keeping it real. Like I said, I should have reached out to you, although I'm happy where I am, trust and believe.
Right.
But how do you reconcile being in situations where you're given a data set, you give them back some information, it shows the organization what they don't want to see.
Right.
How do you reconcile that? Any suggestions?
I mean, first off, bravo, because the first step was actually presenting the data as the data revealed things to you. So what you could have done was to just talk about that 10%. And instead you talked about how they were biased, for lack of a better word, right? So how do you reconcile that? So let's see. There is the professional Dr. Marshall answer, and then there is the Brandeis answer. Which one do you want, Kimberly?
Well, I want the one that keeps food on the table,
Okay.
because ultimately,
right. You want the professional. You want the professional Marshall. Okay, got it. You want the professional Marshall. Yeah,
walk that line. That line is line is tight.
Yeah. You want the professional Marshall one. So the professional Marshall answer would have been, I would have suggested that you, once you find out what the data was, what was going on with the data and how it was so skewed, I would have suggested you go to a colleague who had some clout, right? And start to share some of your insights. Hey, this data is there any more data? To be a little bit, I feel like there's some missing stuff here. I just want to ask some, I just want to make sure that I have all the data I need. And this is kind of what I'm finding out. So to have that type of conversation with one person that you trust, that has some influence. And as you're sharing those insights, you know, that trusted individual is going to share it with whomever the powers that be are. And they either would tell you to just to provide the report in paper form and not do it any other way. So therefore they could bury it. But at the end, so that's where you keep food on the table, is that you piece it out to individuals without doing a big full presentation. The other way, in order to keep food on the table, but still share it, is to do a drip drip. Give them just a little bit and then hold everything else back. Give a little bit and you kind of go back and forth. You give them stuff that they want to know, then you give them stuff that they don't want to know. Then you give them stuff that they want to know. It's like a kid. You can't tell a kid all bad news because the kid's going to be mad. But if you tell the kid bad news and then good news and then bad news and then good news, they'll take the bad news a whole lot better.
So I sold it by the fact that it was pretty equitable. You know, men and women were getting the advanced treatment.
Yeah.
But, you know, the report went out. I gave them the information and then they did what they wanted with it. And that's how I was able to keep food on the table until they laid me off due to COVID.
Right.
And then got $10 million from the government, but that's another conversation. Maybe I should delete that from the recording. But anyway, I feel like I did the part that I had the power to do.
Yes.
Now, what they did from there was on them. And that's kind of how I reconciled. Now, what would have been a challenge for me is if I would have had to present that to the stakeholder.
Right. That would have been a different challenge.
Yeah, I don't know if I could have held that back. I'm gonna be honest.
No. Yeah. And I don't think you could have held that back because the data doesn't show that. So that's kind of the reason why I say, you know, creating rebel techies is because you don't need to be alone in that discomfort.
Yeah.
Right? Is that if there's enough people in an organization that have that discomfort, then the top brass can only do so much in order to suppress it.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, there needs to be like a squeezing effect, right? Right. So the people inside the organization are pushing up against, you know, being anti-racist and being, anti-discriminatory. And there's people at the organization side, they're like, wait a second, I'm seeing a lot of this happening over and over again. I need to maybe think about this, right? At the leadership level. Then you have the public putting pressure as well in order to be more equitable, to be anti-racist and anti-discriminatory and anti-suppressive and anti-oppressive, right? So at a certain realm, you were crushed under a system that was designed to crush that information.
Yeah.
And that's just the end of the story. Like, that's it, period, as they say, as the young folks say, period.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall.
You're welcome. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh. Ah, people like Rebel Techie. Yeah, I like it too. People still use trifling? No. No. I can't believe
I do.
Well, we are the same generation, mama. We are the same generation. Thank you.
Can I just take a minute to highlight some things about Dr. Marshall? So she's one of the first or one of the only Black women in America with a computer science PhD. I just always got to mention that.
Always and forever. There's about 100, maybe it's a little bit more than 100 now because of the pandemic, Black women with PhDs in computer science, but rare breed.
Very rare, but doing the damn thing, as the young folks say. Oh wait, maybe the young folks ain't saying it no more. I don't know.
I don't know what the young folks say. I understand my age. I don't look like it because, you know, Black don't crack, but I've been around a minute. Been around the bend. Yeah, exactly. I still look young. People still mistake me for a college student every now and again. I mean, like, appreciate you. Any other general questions that you have? I got some great questions at the top of this. What would I tell my younger self? That was a great question. And the data industry, because when she asked the question, what do I tell my younger self? I thought she just meant in general. And I was about ready to go a whole different situation.
So as a fellow educator, can you share, if a person is interested in focusing in this type of work, any suggestions for what they should study in college, or do they need a doctorate, a master's? Can you share any educational
tidbits? Yeah, so education wise, if you want to do data education, whatever that might look like for you, data engineering, data visualization, data analysis, any type of education, if you want to be in an academic institution, you have to have at least a master's degree. That's the way the systems are set up. Okay, you have to have a master's degree. But ideally, I would say, you know your stuff, you have experience, you're in the workforce, you don't need a master's degree. That work experience is awesome, and you could definitely be on the coaching side, and you can coach people through the practical uses of data so that they can understand where data can be faulty and limiting. So as far as college is concerned, majors could be literally anything, but majors that make you money, more to your point, Kimberly, majors that can make you money. I would say focus in on statistics, computer science, information science, that type of realm, business analytics. Business will be a really great place, because if you want to make money and then you want to become an educator, you got to make money and become an educator. I think that's really important. And if you're really concentrated on the social aspects of data, sociology, anthropology is very, very, very helpful inside of this space of making sure that your data education is in context with our greater world and society. Hopefully that's helpful, but to major in things. Oh, Frederick.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you again. I think I saw you last year when you did this. Thanks for the presentation. I had a quick question. It seems like the best answer for all of this is to have basically more Black representation in the data space. I've been a software engineer a while, and for me, that looks like artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you've been an engineer for a while, I think it would be practical for just a software engineer to phase into artificial intelligence and machine learning. Basically, keep my hands dirty technically, but also be able to have an impact on these kinds of things. First question, would you agree? The second question, wouldn't this most likely involve getting back in the classroom? Because artificial intelligence and machine learning is a discipline in itself now.
Mm-hmm. So answer your first question, I think that there's a lot of representation challenges within the tech space in general that we don't talk about. The toxicity and the intentional burnout of the culture. And that is definitely a hurdle that is felt by a number of different marginalized groups, not just Black people. I think Black people definitely need to be inside of spaces more. I mean, it's only at the trillion-dollar companies, it's 6%, I guess, of Black people, 18% or so of Asian people, 6 to 7% of Latino people. And so none of that is actually good inside the tech space because there is no representation, really. And then if you look at who is in power positions in order to make decisions, it dwindles down very quickly. So there is an issue inside of a lot of realms inside of tech that has a big entry level swath of marginalized groups, but they never get promoted. So we gotta address that. So the first question, I want to say that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in the education space in general in order to make it more appealing to someone that's not white and not man. There's a lot of work to be done. And every time there is a grant or proposal or work in order to make the education system more reflective of our society, it gets shot down, to be quite honest. But moving from a software engineer position into another realm, which I think was you're talking about AI and machine learning space. I think software engineers definitely have a natural tendency to move into the AI machine learning space just because you're all working with algorithms. And so there's a lot of similarities, a lot of overlap amongst those disciplines. But of course, those disciplines, as far as getting a degree in them, are not as plentiful. And so again, there's an access issue, and access when it comes to education and what schools you go to, and then which schools are considered prestigious enough in order for employers to actually hire someone from that institution or from that degree program. So there's a lot of structural and cultural and workplace challenges that are happening within the data industry that doesn't have a silver bullet of just having more Black people. So yeah, I think I answered all your questions, but if I did not, please let me know.
All right, and then we have M.M. Bennett with the raised hand.
Oh, hi. Forgive me, I have a sinus infection, so I know I probably sound like Marge Simpson, but
no worries.
I have a question because I think I know I'm on the other side of the spectrum where I'm, 15 years in, higher education, and you've got the bachelor's, you got the master's, and now you're sitting here questioning your life choices because, I think the pandemic has done that for everyone, and I've always had an interest in tech, but I was trying to find a lane where my interests in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, tech, higher ed, where those would merge and, kind of make for a natural marriage. So at this point, going back to school is just not something I'm interested in. Shout out to student debt. But so I'm trying to find a lane, I think, and just getting overwhelmed in that process of resources and spaces, that I can seek out I'm joined, of course, I'm following all the brilliant, hilarious Black techies on Twitter. You're one of those. And trying to find, self-paced learning resources. But are there other recommendations that you would, maybe have for someone like me who's more mid-level and looking to transition into a completely different career field?
Yes, I do. And this is like a greatest commercial ever. So for me, because I'm actually leading Black Women in Data as an initiative, but underneath that umbrella is a Beyond One community that I lead. Okay. And it is Black women, typically, as I say, seasoned, okay, long in the tooth. I also say we've been reorged a couple of times.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So
yes.
We've been, you've been reorged a time or two, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And this is a group of Black women. We meet once a month. And I share resources about the data industry, some resources of like where to go, like free resources, some books, as well as just having these monthly calls where we can talk through things. Like the last call we had was earlier this week, and I talked through how to like do an inventory of your accomplishments for the year.
Okay. I love it.
And kind of what are some questions to ask yourself, looking at how much money you are, what is your worth to a company, right? Like, what's your hourly rate to a company? I think Kim had started that conversation on Twitter, and then I responded to it with the breakdown of like how many hours you spend for that company, if you overwork and things. So there's that resource. So I think there are communities like the Beyond One community that could be very helpful. And right now, the enrollment to Beyond One isn't open, but the good part is that we are planning a Black Women in Data Summit for.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah, and it's for September or October of 2022. We're still trying to get all of our ducks in a row, but it's going to be here in Atlanta. So pin the date, so that you can come. Down. Yeah,
I just wrote it down.
And the whole point of the summit is for you to walk away with a plan, with at least the skeleton of a plan. Like, if you want to get in the data industry, if you're in the data industry, what do you want to do? Because a lot of people are in your situation. You've already had a number of years in one career, and you're not going back to school. You're not trying to be hazed like that.
Accurate.
No, I'm not doing that now. One more test. Best believe I ain't doing nan one test. I'm not doing another certification. I'm just over that.
Yes.
But if I do need to do a certification, I want it to be purposeful, and I know exactly where the money's going to come from. So that's going to be part of the Black Women in Data Summit, is to really provide women a way in order to connect with each other, as well as a way in order to come out with what would be my next steps and provide those prompts. And facilitating that. And of course, I'll be there. And then, all that, and then talking to different people, hoping to have some other wonderful Black people in data just to be there and enjoy.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
You're welcome. But you can always DM me, and I can share particular resources as I learn about, exactly what your interests are. I can share specific resources.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
No problem. I understand that. Whatever. What did Kimberly call? What did Kim call it? Senior.
Okay. Yeah. And I received that lesson because I've been in all these different positions. But yeah, when you think about the longevity of it, especially higher ed, it's definitely senior.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah, senior. Yeah. Oh, sorry, it was Sia. Okay, I thought it was Kimberly. Okay, Sia.
Fake Kimberly.
Yeah, fake Kimberly. Sorry, fake Kimberly said that. Yes. Yeah. But I understand it's a very different space, because not all the data industry needs to be focused on the kids. They want to focus. Sorry, I shouldn't say kids. All of the college students. Sorry to call y'all kids. The college students. Not to focus on, because to me, focusing on the college students in the data industry is another way in order to kick the kick the importance can down the street, right? If you try to say that, oh, we need to focus just on the college students, then the people who are able to make change, the people who have the influence to make change, the mid-level and senior level people, they therefore like, well, it's not my accountability. I don't need to do nothing for that. It's the next generation. No, it's your generation. It's right now. Right now. Not 5 years from now. It's right now.